Welcome to Mommy Heal Thyself. We feature guests who provide you with the tools, resources, and strategies you need to say no to a life of pain and suffering from all forms of preventable disease, toxic drugs, and unnecessary surgeries. We hope to inspire you to boldly reclaim your ability to heal and to serve the ones you love. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Mommy Heal Thyself. And today we have a phenomenal guest with us. His name is Dr. Haim, and he is a general and trauma surgeon in Greenville, Texas. He recently finished his general surgery training at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, where he was a resident from 2018 until 2023. During this time, he helped to expose the Texas Children's Hospital, the largest children's hospital in the world, for lying to the public about the existence of their pediatric sex change program. In May 2023, he has served as the anonymous whistleblower in a story released by the journalist Christopher Rufo, which exposed the Texas Children's Hospital continued and expanded its pediatric sex change program behind closed doors. And despite announcing that the program had been shut down in March 2022, within 24 hours of the story's publication, the Texas Senate passed the legislation banning surgical and hormonal interventions on children who believe that they are transgender. The bill passed with bipartisan support, thanks in part to his story in Rufo's story. As a result of his anonymous whistleblowing, he is now being targeted for prosecution by the Department of Justice and the Department of Health and Human Services for an unspecified crime. Due to the corrupt conduct of the prosecutor and agents involved in this case, in January 2024, he decided to take his story public, and his attorneys also believe that he blew the whistle on the DOJ's conduct in a letter to Congress. Now, he and his wife live in a small town outside of Dallas, Texas, and they are expecting their first baby this fall. So thank you so very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Yeah, we're very excited to bring Talia into the world.
I mean, before we go into all of the gruesome stuff, tell me about this little fantastic bundle that you're expecting in the fall.
Yeah, so I think now she's like a little bit, maybe less than the size of my fist. She has my nose because we saw it on the ultrasound. We had like a great side profile. So she's got like a really good Jewish nose, just like me. Yeah, oh, yeah. And she moves around a lot, and she's perfect.
Oh my gosh. And the reason why I love talking about babies is because I see it on your face that this is why you do what you do. Well, that's my assumption. Let me not put words into your mouth, but tell us a little bit
it's
about.
absolutely true. Yeah, that's why. I mean, it's like, I just couldn't imagine like living with myself if I knew that I didn't do something and then, my kids are brought into a world that is much more dangerous and chaotic. And like, if you do the right thing, like you're going to be targeted by the government. Like I couldn't stand by and just let that happen. So, I mean, I felt obligated to try to do something about it.
Well, let's go back in time a little bit and just acquaint us with the generals about the story, in terms of what happened, when did it come to your awareness, and why did you even decide to do anything at that point?
Yeah. Well, so like you said before, I was a general surgery resident from 2018 to 2023 at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, one of the best programs in the country. And one of the hospitals we spend the most time working with is Texas Children's Hospital. And it's one of the most amazing places you can work at, because what they do for these sick kids is unreal. I mean, they take the sickest kids and they make them better. But it was, after COVID that you had this transgender ideology proliferate, where you would tell these confused, vulnerable young children that they were born in the wrong body. And the only way to become correct is to permanently, commit themselves to a life of drugs and surgery. And if they didn't do that, they were going to kill themselves.
Wow.
But, you know, I thought that this would happen in like Washington or New York or California, but definitely not in Texas, and definitely not the hospital that I worked at. So I had learned that, yeah, the hospital had released a statement in March of 2022 that said unequivocally they were going to shut down their pediatric transgender program. But they said they were going to shut down because of the legal risks. And that's an important point because it was only a few weeks before that the Attorney General of Texas issued an opinion saying that it could be investigated as child abuse. So it kind of makes sense why they would release that statement, right? They want to release it so that they can cover themselves. They can reassure the people of Texas that they're not doing it because they know that the people of Texas don't support something like this if they were abusing kids like this. So it was shortly after that that co-residents, people I worked with in my program, would come up to me and tell me that they had just implanted a puberty blocking device into some 11, 12, 13-year-old kid. They would tell me about all these psychiatric issues that were being unaddressed, you know, like these chaotic family environments where each person in the family was transgender. And at first, I didn't believe it because I didn't think the hospital would lie so egregiously. This is the biggest children's hospital in the world, and for them to release this public statement, but then do something else behind closed doors, like I just didn't believe it. But then, right, I started to believe it more when it became more frequent, when more people started telling me these stories about doing these surgeries, and they were just getting more shocking. But then in January of 2023, the directors of the program, the transgender program that supposedly didn't exist, were given the opportunity to speak at the hospital's most prestigious lecture series, right? And they had advised general pediatricians to ask about gender identity behind the backs of their parents, right? They had encouraged, this algorithmic approach for these confused kids, with blockers, hormones, and then surgery, which would permanently sterilize them. And there was even one, there was a meeting between people in the transgender program and a bunch of medical students in January of 2023. A social worker talked about how she concealed her consultations she sent to the transgender clinic by calling it instead of writing it, instead of documenting it. And I thought to myself, like, yeah, so they know that they're doing this, like they're lying, but they're making it a hospital priority because the Grand Rounds lecture is the biggest lecture every week in the hospital, right? So the only way for someone to give that lecture is if it is a hospital priority. So you have so many people who are participating and know about this lie. And what this lie is resulting in is the manipulation, mutilation, and sterilization of these young kids. So, I had a decision to make. What do I do about it? And, like you had mentioned before, I mean, I couldn't imagine a world where I bring my daughter into that this kind of thing is accepted and where she looks back and thinks like, what did my dad do about it? Well, I had to do something, but also there are these kids who are being abused by these doctors, right? So that's when I made the decision to begin reaching out to journalists.
One of the things that I think is so key about what you just said was that you said it was startling that it was happening in Texas and at the largest children's hospital in the world, because I think a lot of us make the mistake of believing, oh, well, it can't happen here. It can't happen in Florida. It can't happen, in Hokey Hope land where, we are really strong advocates for our children. So I'm curious if you can give us a little bit more insight into how could this happen in some place like Texas under people's noses?
Yeah. And, it's even worse than that because, I work in a very, very small town, like a very rural area, a very conservative area where people still hold good values.
Yeah.
But this kind of thing is very prevalent there too. I heard a story about a teacher at a middle school, a kid who identified as a cat, and the school had provided them a litter box in the nurse's room to use a bathroom. But so the question is like, how does it happen under our noses? And I think our society, we have become so tolerant of everything, right? That tolerance has become a weakness, that we forget that it's the boundaries we place, the virtues we insist that people live up to, that give life meaning. And that when we allow people to self-destruct and to not live within the boundaries of reality, that's not tolerant, that's not virtuous. Like, that is just encouraging the self-destruction of these people. And I think that that's how it happens, right? That, and then also, this slow progression to normalize this type of behavior, right? And not only is it we're convincing people that they can become something completely different, when you should just tell them they're perfect the way they are, like they're beautiful, and you can find a way to be happy within yourself. And yeah, I think it's those things that are the primary drivers of it.
I think it's so key what you're saying, that, we're in this world where we think that it's virtuous to quote unquote be tolerant of everything, not paying attention to what is the effect on our children. And there's to me, a stark line of distinction between quote unquote tolerance and ensuring the safety of our children. A lot of people will say that I'm transphobic or whatever it is. And what I keep on sharing with people is that my heart goes out to these children and adults that are dealing with these feelings and dealing with these variations of mental illness. And unfortunately, in our desire to navigate the world of PC, we're not choosing to protect our children. We have been given the responsibility of being protectors to our children, and yet we're not doing so. We just had a recent article about chest feeding. And it just boggles my mind, because I was talking to a group of women who are part of a significant organization, and they were saying, oh, well, we can't make these people feel badly because they just want to take care of their children. And in my mind, I keep on saying, who is speaking on behalf of the children?
Yeah, and especially when we're talking about chest feeding and pumping toxic, drug-laced fluid into the bodies of these children. It's there's a certain point where it's you know, yeah, they might feel bad, but that's life, unfortunately, right? When you're putting these kids in danger, when you're, manipulating reality and then expecting other people to stay silent. No, sorry, like that's not acceptable. And yeah, I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier too. Like, how is this thing able to proliferate in areas where people still hold to like basic virtues? And it's that exactly, like, it's the appearance of being nice, of being tolerant, but really what we're doing is just aiding in the destruction of these people. Because if we really cared about them, right, we would say something, because they have a greater amount of dignity to live up to.
I say to people that it's as if someone came to me who was anorexic and said, Michelle, I think that I'm like Gordo the whale. I need for a surgeon to go in and shave off some of this fat and do liposuction and take off all of this fat that's making me look like Gordo the whale. You and I would look at this young lady and she looks like a skeleton. Are we affirming her by going in and doing liposuction and shaving off whatever little bit of flesh that she has left?
Yeah, and it's so shocking, because that's so true. And what's happening with these kids with quote unquote gender affirming care is so much worse, because it's going down to like the core essence of who they really are. But take that example you mentioned, right, about the anorexic girl, right? If I had clinic tomorrow, right, and I had a patient come in and they were telling me that, I'm anorexic, and I saw them, they were a healthy size. and I say, okay, you're anorexic. I'm going to take you to the OR. I'm going to cut off all this fat and then do a gastric sleeve, right? Because I have to affirm you, right? What would happen is I would lose my license and probably go to prison, right? So at a certain point, we have to ask ourselves, why is there this exception for this other area? Because by any logical analysis, what's happening with these kids who believe they're transgender is much worse than the example we just provided.
Yeah. So one of the things I want us to delve into at this time is the concept of being a hero. I think that we live in a world where we don't have many heroes, especially not for our children. People who are generally championing the need for us to elevate and protect our children by any means necessary. And I want us to perhaps delve into your story of what you thought would happen when you stepped out into the world of being a whistleblower, as opposed to what actually happened, which was a pleasant surprise to me because I totally did not realize this is what happened.
Yeah. Well, and just to give people a little context, so after the story comes out on May 16th, 2023, I was the anonymous whistleblower in the story with Christopher Rufo that had detailed how the hospital had lied to the public about the existence of this program. They had said they shut it down, but they just continued it and expanded it behind closed doors. And, the story came out at the perfect moment because a day later, the Texas Senate was voting on SB 14, which was the law that was going to ban these interventions in children who believe that they were transgender. And it was because our story came out the day before that there were multiple Democrats who voted in favor of it because they didn't know this kind of thing was happening in their districts. But then once our story came out, they couldn't deny it. And I know this because actually I gave an introduction for the person who wrote that bill, Senator Tom Alderson. And he told me it was amazing. And then other whistleblowers come out from the hospital a couple of days later, telling, I believe it was a nurse who told her story about, working in the clinic with this doctor and how these kids would be started on these medications without understanding anything. The parents didn't understand anything. And then the hospital, for the second time in 14 months, says he's going to shut down the program, right, in accordance with the passage of SB 14. So after that, everything just goes quiet. I mean, I just get back to my regular life. And it was a month later in June that I was graduating from my surgical training. So it was the day of graduation, the ceremony, which was a really big day. It was June 23rd, 2023, right? It's like you make all these sacrifices over the previous 5 years and you miss so many life events. You work 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And, it's finally the day you're graduating. So it's a big deal. My family's there and it's 11:12 in the early afternoon. We're getting ready for the ceremony. And all of a sudden we get an aggressive knock on the door. I thought, like, that's weird, right? So I shuffle over, I open it, and standing outside are two federal agents with Health and Human Services. They show me their badges and tell me that they're investigating a case regarding medical records. So, in that moment, I just completely freak out. But in the back of my mind, I knew that they were there to intimidate and to instill fear, right? Like a month before, we had challenged the dominant political ideology and they needed to make an example out of me. So they come in and they want to interview me. So they set up this little tripod and, I'm luckily kind of going along with it. And, but perfect timing, my wife comes out and for context, she's a brilliant attorney. She had been hired as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Texas for the Department of Justice. So she's very smart. And she was undergoing a background check at the time. The agents didn't know any of this. We look at each other, we go back to our room and we close the door and we say, bad idea. We shouldn't speak with them without an attorney present because we know what they're there for, right? Go back out. We tell them and they say, okay. But before leaving, they hand me a target letter. So then they walk out the door and I read that letter. And it tells me that I'm a potential target of a criminal investigation. And it's signed by a assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of Texas. And, after that door closed, like we knew, like before, we had a decision to make. Like, do we fight back?
Mm-hmm.
Or, do we just try and make this all go away and comply with what's obviously a corrupt investigation?
Mm-hmm.
Because we knew that, like, I didn't do anything wrong,
Yeah.
right? That everything was above board.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew that they were there to make sure other whistleblowers wouldn't do the same thing. So that day they wanted to, intimidate us and instill fear, but they just knocked on the wrong door because we decided to fight.
They
And
messed with the wrong couple.
yeah, yeah,
The
yeah,
dynamic duo.
yeah. It's funny because we thought like, well, what do? We have graduation in a couple hours, right? So, well, first thing we got on the phone with Christopher Rufo, the journalist, and he's like, all right, no, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to put you in touch with an attorney. And he got us in touch with an attorney by the name of Marcella Burke.
Mm-hmm.
And it couldn't have been better timing because she had just left her position as a partner at some prestigious law firm, making like 7 figures. And she quit because she didn't want to put pronouns in her bio. And she's like this Shiite Catholic, like rosary in one hand, middle finger in the other, bulldog of an attorney. And we were like, man, this lady is the real deal. We're going to hire her.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked to her. She understands what this case is about. And she has the right people to do it. But then we still have the ceremony there that night. And so we get a couple bottles of champagne. We go on our patio and we celebrate, right? And we, put on like some Vietnam War music and plan our war strategy. And
war paint.
yeah, because like what else could we do? I mean, like you can like sit around and feel sorry for yourself, but now it's like, we decided to fight back and we were going to make the most of it. But so we go to the graduation. It was great. And then, during one of my attendings was giving a speech, when they called my name and, say a couple nice words, my wife just breaks down and she runs to the bathroom. She's crying and everyone thought it was because, the words were so nice, but it was because she didn't know if, like I was going to get perp walked out of the place. Like she didn't know what the future was going to hold. And we had this entire future ahead of us, but at that point it was all in free fall. But it was the months following that we fully understood the extent of the corruption. And it was that decision or those experiences that informed my decision to take my story public in January of 2024, because over those preceding couple months between June 2023 and January 2024, I got a experience with how far the corruption goes. And my attorneys felt obligated to blow the whistle to Congress. And it details how corrupt they really are. For example, they said they would take me to a jury trial, even if they were sure they were going to lose, right? And you can't just charge someone with a crime if you don't think they committed a crime, right? They had no concept of what the case was about. She didn't even know what statutes she was investigating. She didn't know what evidence she would even include, right? When my attorneys would ask her. But the most egregious thing is that even though she didn't know anything about the case, she knew enough to dig into my wife's background, right? And one of the first conversations she mentions, Andrea is not going to have any problems with her background check unless she continues to become difficult. So
we know what she meant by that.
Yeah. And there was no hope if I decided to stay silent. So I knew I had to go public. And to go back to your original question, it's like you think that your life is going to be destroyed, that everyone's going to abandon you and you're going to lose everything. And granted, we've lost a lot, right? We sacrificed a lot. But what I discovered in the process was that for the first time in my life, once I told the truth about the story, like I'm just able to live with like what I truly define as human dignity. I don't have to lie every day, right? And I can stand up against these people who are trying to destroy our country. So, what greater privilege is there than that?
And you are my hero, because I have to confess that I didn't have the strength that you did. When they came and took my child from me, And maybe because I didn't have the lawyers that you did, but the people that were surrounding me kept saying, just be quiet, just be quiet, don't say anything, And so I thought that I had to be quiet. I thought that, if I weren't quiet, then they would make things even worse, as in come and take the rest of my children. But there comes a time when we have to choose not to go down that pathway of fear, false evidence appearing real, and trust in God. And when I look at you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I truly believe that one of the things that gave you the strength to go out on that limb was your deep faith.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt. Everything, like, we got in touch with Rufo at the perfect time by divine providence. Our story came out the day before this vote, right? And we got in touch with Marcella Burke, who only quit her law firm a few months before and started her own law firm. So she took this case, at the worst possible time in her career. And Rufo said, like she would on the first phone call, she tells me that Rufo's like, well, you gotta take this case, and she's like, I can't, like. But then Rufo says, like, if not you, then who? So she knew, like, it was her destiny to do it, and then everything that's happened afterward has been by divine providence. But and I think you bring up a good point about the silence, right? It's like, and it's because we have to understand that times are changing, that the Department of Justice that we once knew is not, it doesn't exist anymore, right? For people like us, when we get caught into a politically driven case, to stay silent is to ensure our own destruction. Because the only legitimacy the only way for this investigation to maintain its legitimacy is for us to grant it by our voluntary participation. And it appears like we don't have any control, but in actuality, we have all the control, because we have the possibility of just speaking the truth. And when you do tell the truth, the corruption becomes self-evident.
You put the light that makes cockroaches scatter.
Exactly.
But now, if you can just take a small moment to empower our parents with what is it that they can do to protect their children? Because one of the really insidious parts of your story is the fact that this can happen in the hospital. And I'm wondering, how does it happen with parents not knowing? So I'm curious as to how that occurs and what can parents do to protect their children.
So after my story went public, I was contacted by a group of mothers and fathers in Dallas, because I live outside Dallas. And this is a group of parents who have lost their children to the transgender ideology. So these are not the parents who were encouraging this type of thing. These were parents who had kids who were groomed by a friend, by an older acquaintance, by a counselor, by a teacher, by the internet. And this group of parents, like this, it's like an underground network of really active parents who, like, are involved in legislation. They have like a huge amount of influence in Texas politics, which is amazing because it's just regular parents. And I got a chance to meet a lot of them in person, hear their stories. And what they say is, and these are people just like me and you, right? People who love their kids. And they say that there's a couple of features that they say are the primary drivers of their kid being taken into this ideology. And number one is unrestricted access to the internet, like, forums like Reddit or Tumblr, or like whatever these other, I don't know what the other ones are, but the other ones, where you have a kid who is in a state of a turmoil, right? Like the typical adolescent angst, and they have this opportunity, like, to be a part of this group, right? This transgender group, where all their pain and suffering is going to have an answer for it. So it's appealing to them, and they can get sucked into it before you even know it. So that's one thing I would say. It's one thing my wife and I had changed our minds on, is that we're not going to give our child a cell phone. I mean, maybe like a very basic one from like the 90s. But
one that can dial phone number to call you, and that's about it.
Maybe a pager. Maybe a pager.
A pager sounds good.
Yeah, but then also it's so that's one thing. But then also once it does happen, I believe there's different, opinions on this, but I believe that you can't just let it go. You can't, like, you have to do everything you can. You have to cut that kid off from all of their financial, like if you're paying for their college, you
Mhm.
can't pay for their college. You have to make their life really miserable. They have to be able to live on their own, because the one parent who got their kid out of this
Mhm.
completely cut their kid off, and the child had to work at a Taco Bell for a year,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Minimum wage with a bunch of working class people.
Yeah.
And it was only through that experience that they realized that, you know what, like everything I believed in was false because of like this comfortable, pleasant life that I had been given.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would say that once you do find it, you have to do everything you can to prevent it from moving forward.
I think another layer of what I'm hearing from you is when you decide to be a warrior on behalf of your children, you're doing so with the expectation and the understanding that it's not going to be comfortable. You know, it's the path of least resistance is to allow this to become pervasive. But if you decide that you want to really defend your child, recognize that it's going to be an uphill battle. And a lot of times you're going to feel your heart being wrenched like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Because nobody wants to say no to their child.
Yeah.
It's hard, but at the same time, no is actually saying yes to that child
Yeah.
being able to live a thriving, healthy life for the rest of his or her existence on this world. So,
Do you remember that show from a while back called Intervention?
yeah.
Yeah. So, it's a, for people who don't know, it's a show about these people who are really, really addicted to drugs, right? Their life is falling apart. They're spiraling into chaos. And it's kind of a documentary about the families and these drug addicts and their path towards this intervention. But at the end of it, they say that you have to cut off that person completely because you love them. You
Right.
can't enable this behavior because the only thing it does is perpetuate it. And
Yeah.
that if you really love your child, if you really believe that they deserve a better future,
Mhm.
you cannot enable them to live a life that will ultimately result in their own destruction.
Mm.
That the dignity you see in them has to be matched by your own actions.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with this, where it's always the most difficult decision for the families,
Mhm.
and the families have to go through all this counseling and coaching, right?
Mm.
They have to become warriors in
Mhm.
order to stand up and be like, no, I will not give you $20, right?
Yeah.
Because I know it's going to go straight into your arm.
Yeah.
And just like with these kids who get pulled into this ideology, we have to say, no, like I will not, you know, comply with this disordered thought pattern because it makes you feel good, because you have to live with the reality that you were dealt.
Yeah.
And if there's no way to exist beyond those boundaries, your life will always be chaos and heartache if you don't learn to live within the peace of your existence.
And it's recognizing that it is yet another form of disease.
Yeah.
And we do not help people to heal by allowing the disease to spread, And so I just want to reach out to every mom, dad, mama bear, papa bear that's out there and say, it's time. It's time for us to rise up and to walk in your footsteps, Ethan, because our children need us to stand up for them. And I
Yeah.
say that with regards to all of this stuff that's going on. And especially now where, like I said, they're starting to talk about this chest feeding nonsense. And we've got to toe the line in saying no more. We cannot sacrifice the next generation. We
Yeah.
cannot and will not sacrifice the next generation just so somebody can feel good for a
Yeah. Or
temporary
if we
period.
want to if we're worried about making someone feel uncomfortable, like we can't sacrifice our children because we're scared of making someone feel bad.
Yeah.
And really it's like, yeah, people, they have to know that they'll have to sacrifice, right? And whether it's money, their career, or whatever. But and for me, right, we've spent over $200,000 every dollar we've ever had, and we've kind of come to terms with the fact that we're going to be broke for a very, very long time.
Mhm.
But really, that's a privilege because it was because we were able to fund this case that we were able to fight back, right? And but what you get in response is like your own dignity, right? You get to wake up in the morning and be like, these people, like I'm not bending the knee to these people. So for the first time in your life, you can like stand up, look in the mirror and be like, yeah, like you're a man or you're a woman, right? And I'm standing up for my children. And there's nothing you can do about it.
And for all of us, especially those of you who don't feel strong enough to go out there and fight that fight with us, I give you another opportunity to do so. In the show links is going to be a link to their fundraising efforts to gather money for the court cases, because this stuff is not cheap. And I know you've got tons of school bills that you're also paying that are going to start knocking on your doors to pay those bills too. And we don't want you to end up in bankruptcy court or something of that nature. You have a beautiful family that is starting, and we want to definitely encourage people to support this passionate fight for our children. Again, if you are not in a position to go out there and do that fighting yourself, then you know what? Be one of the backseat drivers and just contribute to the gas fund, and you're going to take it across the finishing line for us, aren't you, Ethan?
Yeah, and that I like that reference. The backseat and contribute to the gas fund. Like that's exactly it. Yeah, and just it's important for people to know that like that fund now, right, is helping to fund our offense, right? Because like for me to like tell this story is one thing,
Yeah.
right? Just to try to defend myself, but like at this point, that's not enough, right? Where we're kind of changing gears. Like now we're pursuing legal action against them.
Yeah.
So we're taking this story to Congress, hoping to get a congressional investigation into the DOJ, HHS, the FBI, but then also going through attorneys in Texas who have abused their authority, who have lied in court cases, in complaints that were submitted in courts, challenging SB 14 and legislation like that, where you can't, because we can't have lawyers who violate the ethics of their profession by misrepresenting basic facts in court cases, and they're allowed to get away with it. And what we realize is that, well, this is something we can do, right? Like no one else is doing it, so we have to do it. So that's what the donations are going towards is offense, because there's no point playing defense if they've already taken the all of the ground. Like we have to start taking it back.
So now, in closing up for today, I would love for you to share some words of inspiration, because sometimes it can look so bleak. And I know a lot of people just feel overwhelmed and want to just throw their hands up and say, you know what, this is just beyond me. So wrap us up and give us those words of inspiration.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories is it's a biblical story. So when the Jews were coming out of Egypt and Moses was leading them to the Red Sea, right? They had the Egyptians behind them, but then they had the Red Sea in front of them. But a lot of people don't know that when they got to the water, it's not like the sea just split, right? So they were at the water's edge, and they all thought that they were going to die or go back to slavery. And they asked God, like, please give us a miracle. But it doesn't work like that, right? Like things don't work like that. You have to demonstrate your faith and take a chance and risk everything you are in order to do the right thing. So there was one guy who was in the tribe, right? His name was Nachshon. And he believed that right, if he jumps into the water, if he risks drowning, that maybe God will perform this miracle and split the sea. So he says, I'm going to do it. So he jumps into the water. And at the moment that he thinks he's going to drown and die, right, the sea splits. God performs this miracle. And all it took was for a regular guy like Nachshon to jump into the water. He was no one special. He was just a guy who was kvetching all the way from, Egypt to the Red Sea, just like everyone else, I'm sure was. But he said, I have to demonstrate the faith in God. If I do it, then everyone else will follow. And that's exactly what happened. So like, that's what it seems like when you're in a position to do something where you feel like, man, this is just too crazy. But if you know it's the right thing, like there's faith, right? It's like this illogical dedication to an ideal that we can't really explain, but we don't have to explain it to know that it's true, but it's true. And I'm a testament to that, because like they can do whatever they want to me, but it's they can't touch me if they're lying and I'm speaking the truth. And the same thing applies for everyone who's listening.
The faith the size of a mustard seed.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much for that inspirational message. And ladies and gents, remember, go into the show notes, put in that money for that gas fund, and until next time, peace and blessings. Thank you for tuning in for this episode of Mommy Heal Thyself. If you like what we're doing here, please share, subscribe, like us, and leave a comment. Your feedback is very